I thought I knew my wife, until I uncovered her twisted plan with the man she hired to relax us both. When I found out the truth, I made sure she lost everything she tried to take from me. My name's Greg, and my wife, Lisa, and I have been married for 6 years. We've always had what I thought was a close, happy marriage. She works from home as a graphic designer, while I'm in an office downtown, usually out from 9 to 6. About a month ago, Lisa brought up the idea of having a massage therapist come to the house a couple of times a week. She said her job had been more stressful than usual, and that I could probably use a break from the tension of my work too. She talked about it as if it was this wonderful thing she was setting up for us. And I thought, why not? A massage after a long workday sounded perfect, and I appreciated that she wanted us to share this experience. So, we set it up with this guy named Dylan, who came highly recommended by one of Lisa's friends. Lisa would get her massage at 5 p.m., right before I got home, and then it'd be my turn at 6:30. The arrangement seemed ideal. Lisa could unwind before I even walked through the door, and I'd follow suit soon after. For the first few weeks, it was nothing but amazing. I was grateful Lisa had thought of it, and it felt like just another example of her thoughtful nature. But recently, I started noticing some small things that didn't sit right. At first, it was just minor stuff that probably wouldn't bother most people. But I couldn't shake this feeling that something was a little off. Lisa had always been open about everything, her friends, her work, her plans for the day. But ever since Dylan started coming over, she'd started acting differently, subtly, but just enough for me to notice. For one thing, she'd get this nervous energy around 4:30, checking the time frequently and pacing a bit, which wasn't like her at all. And then, right before Dylan arrived, she'd go and freshen up. I get it, she wanted to look her best for the massage, but something about the way she'd touch up her hair and put on perfume struck me as more than just getting ready for a massage therapist. Then, I noticed how she always seemed in an especially good mood by the time I got home. You know, almost glowing. She'd smile at me like she had some secret she wasn't quite ready to share, and I figured it was just her enjoying this self-care routine. But the energy felt odd. On top of that, she'd always meet me at the door, almost like she was making sure I arrived when expected. It was a nice gesture, but a part of me started wondering why she was so eager to greet me. My rational mind tried to shake it off. Maybe she was just relaxed from the massage, or maybe I was overthinking. But something about her behavior kept gnawing at me. I told myself that it was all in my head, that she was just being her thoughtful, considerate self. After all, she'd arranged this whole thing to benefit us. But looking back, I wonder if I wasn't already seeing the first signs of something I just wasn't ready to admit. One Thursday, I decided to come home early, something I hadn't done in a while. Work had wrapped up earlier than expected, and I figured it'd be a nice surprise for Lisa. Maybe we could have an early dinner together or just unwind a bit before Dylan arrived for our massages. I didn't call her to let her know. I thought the surprise would be a nice change. I pulled up to the house around 5:30, just as the sun was beginning to set. As I approached the door, I heard voices inside, low and muffled. I assumed it was just Lisa and Dylan chatting, so I let myself in quietly, figuring I'd slip into the kitchen to grab a snack and wait until my turn came up. But as I stepped through the front hall, I heard something that stopped me in my tracks. It was Lisa's laugh, but not the casual, light-hearted kind I was used to hearing. It was more intimate, more flirtatious. Then, I caught a few words, "I've been thinking about that all day," followed by a hushed, excited giggle. My stomach dropped as I realized these weren't the sounds of a normal, professional session. I took a few silent steps toward the living room where the voices were coming from, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. My heart pounded in my chest, and every instinct told me to turn around and forget it, to pretend I hadn't come home early, but I couldn't stop myself. As I rounded the corner, I caught sight of Lisa and Dylan on the massage table, far too close, talking in hushed voices, her hand resting on his shoulder in a way that looked anything but professional. They hadn't noticed me yet, too caught up in whatever moment they were sharing, her face lit up in a way that didn't feel like relaxation. It felt like connection. I didn't confront them right then and there. I don't know what held me back, but I felt frozen in place, as though stepping in would make it all too real. So instead, I backed away, carefully slipping out the front door as quietly as I'd come in. After what I saw that afternoon, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on than just massage therapy. I kept replaying that moment in my mind, the way Lisa had looked at him, the laughter that sounded more like intimacy than relaxation. But I needed proof, something undeniable to confirm that I wasn't overthinking this. The next day, while Lisa was out running errands, I went into the living room and set up a small, discreet camera. I placed it high on the bookshelf in a way that wouldn't draw attention. I felt strange doing it, like I was violating the privacy of my own home, but I had to know the truth. I couldn't confront her based on a hunch and risk damaging our relationship if I was wrong. But if my gut feeling was right, then I'd need solid evidence to face her with. I made sure the camera was angled just right to capture the entire room, especially the massage table where they always set up. It was subtle, easy to overlook, and I knew Lisa wouldn't notice it. She'd have no reason to suspect that I'd put a camera in our own home, especially for something like this. That evening, I went about our normal routine, trying not to let on that anything had changed. Lisa seemed her usual cheerful self, acting like everything was normal. But now I couldn't shake the suspicion. Every laugh, every glance, every small gesture from her felt weighted, and I started to question everything. The following days felt like an eternity, waiting for the right moment to check the footage. But I knew that if there was anything happening between them, I'd have what I needed soon enough. A couple of days passed, each one dragging slower than the last. I tried to keep myself busy, focusing on work and our usual routine with Lisa, but my mind kept going back to that camera I'd set up. Finally, the day of her next massage came, and that evening, after Lisa had gone to bed, I knew it was time to see what the footage held. I sat down in my office, my heart pounding, hands slightly shaky as I queued up the video from the hidden camera. The first few hours were exactly what I'd expected, empty footage of an undisturbed living room, a normal, quiet day at home. But then, right on time at 5 p.m., Dylan showed up, and Lisa led him into the room. At first, everything seemed fine. They exchanged a few casual words, setting up the massage table, like nothing was out of the ordinary. But then I saw it, the change in their body language, the way he looked at her, the way she leaned in a little too closely. Before I even realized it, things were escalating faster than I could process. He moved closer, his hands lingering on her shoulders in a way that was anything but professional. She didn't pull away, instead, she leaned into him, almost as if this was part of their routine. Within moments, he was touching her in ways no massage therapist would, and before I knew it, they were locked in an embrace, a kind of urgency between them that left no room for doubt. Then, as if any shred of innocence had vanished, they moved to the massage table. He fell over her, their laughter fading into something far more intimate, and within seconds, they were tangled up together, crossing a line I'd been desperately hoping didn't exist. I sat there, watching, unable to believe what I was seeing. A numbness settled over me as the reality sank in. The woman I thought I knew, the one I'd trusted, loved, and built a life with, was betraying me in the most devastating way possible, right there in the home we shared. The truth was no longer a suspicion. It was undeniable, caught on camera, and it left me in shock, hollowed out by the weight of the betrayal. After what I'd seen, there was no going back. The image of Lisa with Dylan was burned into my mind, a bitter confirmation that our marriage had been a lie. I knew what I had to do, and as painful as it was, I reached out to a divorce lawyer the very next day. I sent him all the evidence, the footage, the texts I'd managed to retrieve, and anything that showed the extent of her betrayal. When we spoke, I made my intentions clear. I wanted a divorce, and I wanted Lisa to walk away with nothing. The lawyer, a seasoned professional named Martin, was calm and direct. "Given what you've shown me, there's a strong case for infidelity. We can use this as leverage to protect your assets." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had some control. Martin explained that the courts take infidelity seriously, and if we handled this right, we could argue that Lisa had breached the trust that was fundamental to our marriage. "I'll do my best to ensure she leaves with as little as possible," he said. "We'll outline the case clearly and go after what's fair, which, in this case, is you keeping what's yours." Hearing his reassurance gave me the strength I needed to move forward. This was the beginning of the end, and I was determined to close this chapter on my terms, to protect what I'd worked so hard for. A few days later, I knew the letter would have arrived. I'd stayed home from work that day, partially to see her reaction, partially because I needed the satisfaction of finally facing her with the truth. Around midday, I heard her call out, "Honey, did you send something to my email?" I didn't answer, just waited, knowing she'd see it soon enough. Moments later, she came rushing into the room, phone clutched in her hand, her face a mix of panic and confusion. "What is this?" she demanded, eyes wide with shock. "An invitation to court? Divorce? What's going on, Mark?" I looked up at her calmly, forcing myself to hold steady, and replied, "It's exactly what it says, Lisa. I fell out of love with you. I want a divorce." She stood there, stunned. For a moment, she seemed at a loss for words, her mind racing to process what she'd just heard. Then, as if on cue, her expression shifted to hurt, maybe even desperation. "Fall out of love? Mark, that doesn't make any sense. I won't give you a divorce. There's nothing wrong between us. Everything is fine." I let out a short, bitter laugh, shaking my head. "Fine?" I repeated. "If you think things are fine, you're even more out of touch than I thought." Her face fell, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. Instead, she simply clenched her jaw, her voice defiant. "I'm not signing anything, Mark. This is absurd. We'll work through whatever you think the problem is." "Well," I replied, meeting her gaze with a calm I barely felt, "we'll see about that." She stormed out of the room, but I could see the worry creeping in around her eyes. She didn't have the upper hand this time, and deep down, I think she knew it. The day of the first hearing arrived, and I walked into the courtroom feeling a mix of nerves and determination. Lisa was there with her lawyer, and they both looked confident, as if this was going to be a walk in the park for them. I stayed quiet, keeping my composure as the proceedings began, ready to let them reveal their hand. Lisa's lawyer took the floor, launching into a carefully crafted speech. He started with a pity angle, claiming that Lisa had been nothing but a loyal wife and partner, blindsided by a husband who had suddenly fallen out of love, for no clear reason. He painted her as the victim, and me as someone who'd unfairly decided to throw away our marriage without a second thought. But then he shifted gears, boldly stating their demands. Given the abrupt nature of Mr. Mitchell's desire for divorce, and the emotional distress this has caused Mrs. Mitchell, we are requesting that she be granted half, if not the entirety, of the marital assets. This includes all properties, financial accounts, and joint investments. This marriage was built on trust, and our client was left abandoned due to her husband's sudden change of heart. The judge listened carefully, taking down notes, his expression unreadable. Lisa kept glancing over at me with that same self-assured smirk, as if she was convinced she'd already won. After the lawyer's speech, the judge addressed both sides and scheduled the next hearing. This was just the beginning, a preliminary round, and I could tell Lisa felt she had everything in her favor. As we left the courtroom, she walked past me with that familiar air of superiority, clearly under the impression that her performance had sealed her victory. But she had no idea what was coming next. The day of the second hearing arrived, and I was prepared, confident that my lawyer would begin presenting our side of the case. But before he even had the chance to start, Lisa's lawyer abruptly stood up, interrupting the flow of proceedings with a smug smile. "Your Honor, before the defense begins, we have a critical development we feel should be addressed immediately, he announced. The judge raised an eyebrow, motioning for him to continue. My lawyer and I exchanged a confused glance, caught off guard by this sudden revelation. Lisa's lawyer glanced at her, then turned back to the judge with a dramatic pause, as if savoring the moment. My client, Mrs. Mitchell, is pregnant, he declared, his voice thick with implication. She is expecting twins, Your Honor. This changes everything. As the future mother of 2 children, Mrs. Mitchell has significant needs and responsibilities. She is entitled to a lifestyle that will support not only herself but also these future children. Given this information, we are requesting that she be awarded the entirety of the marital assets to ensure that she and the children are properly cared for, without any financial hardship. I felt the floor drop out from under me. Pregnant? With twins? The news hit me like a punch to the gut. I looked over at Lisa, but she didn't meet my eyes. Instead, she looked down, feigning modesty or perhaps hiding a smirk. My mind raced, a mix of shock and suspicion battling within me. If this were true, then why had she never mentioned it? The judge made a few notes, his face unreadable. This is indeed a significant revelation, he said, looking between Lisa and me. Given these circumstances, it's only fair to establish parentage before any further decisions are made regarding asset division and support. He turned to address both legal teams. I'm ordering a DNA test to confirm the paternity of these children. We will reconvene after the results are submitted and reviewed. The third hearing is scheduled for 2 weeks from now, at which point we will proceed with all the necessary facts. With that, the judge adjourned the court, and we were dismissed. As I walked out, I felt a strange, icy calm settle over me. Lisa had thrown yet another twist into this mess, but the truth would come out soon enough. If she thought she could manipulate the situation with this pregnancy, she was about to learn that not every plan goes according to her script. The day of the DNA test arrived, and I felt a mix of nerves and resentment as I made my way to the clinic. I wanted to get in and out as quickly as possible. The last thing I wanted was to run into Lisa. I knew how she could be when cornered, and I wasn't in the mood for another scene. But there was no avoiding it. I needed the truth, and this was the only way to get it. The process was straightforward and clinical. I gave my sample to the technician, who assured me that the results would be processed swiftly and confidentially. As I walked out, I felt a flicker of relief, thinking that I'd managed to avoid any unwanted confrontations. But as soon as I stepped into the hallway, I came face to face with Lisa. She stood there, her expression colder than I'd ever seen it, eyes narrowed, practically burning with resentment. She looked at me with a kind of smugness mixed with disdain, crossing her arms as if ready for a showdown. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "are you satisfied now? You say you fell out of love, but we're going to have twins. Or do you still think you can just walk away from this?" She laughed, a bitter, mocking sound that grated on my nerves. She leaned in slightly, her eyes flashing with something close to malice, as if she'd already decided she'd won. But I stayed calm, refusing to rise to her bait. "Let's just see what the results show," I said evenly, holding her gaze. "Then we'll see who's laughing last." For the first time, her confidence seemed to waver. She opened her mouth to say something, but hesitated, her expression faltering just enough to betray a hint of worry. She quickly recovered, trying to look unaffected, but the crack was there, visible beneath her mask. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the hallway. As I left, I felt a renewed sense of determination. She might have thought she could control this game, but the truth was close now. Whatever she'd planned, whatever scheme she'd concocted, the DNA test would reveal everything. And in that moment, I knew, this was far from over. But I'd finally taken the upper hand, and I was ready for whatever came next. The day of the third trial finally arrived. As I walked into the courtroom, I noticed Lisa already sitting with her lawyer, her demeanor unusually calm, almost too calm, as if she were banking on this final performance. I took my seat beside my lawyer, who gave me a reassuring nod. Today, it all came down to what lay inside that envelope, the DNA test result that would either shatter or support Lisa's carefully spun story. The judge entered, and after a moment of formalities, he lifted the white envelope and opened it. All eyes were on him, and the tension in the room was palpable. He cleared his throat, reading over the results with a neutral expression. After a few seconds, he finally looked up, directing his gaze toward Lisa. According to this DNA test, he announced, Mr. Mitchell is not the biological father of the twins in question. The words echoed through the room, and for a moment, there was absolute silence. I felt a surge of relief, followed by a pang of bitterness as I glanced over at Lisa. Her face had drained of color, and her eyes widened in a stunned, horrified expression. She looked at her lawyer in panic, as though begging him to say something, to do something. Her lawyer seemed just as blindsided as she was. He shifted in his seat, his brow furrowed, then quickly rose to his feet. Your Honor, he said, trying to compose himself, given this unexpected development, we respectfully request a postponement of the hearing to reassess the circumstances and gather further information. My lawyer shot up instantly, a steely look of determination on his face. Enough with the postponements, Your Honor. The truth is out now. My client has patiently gone through these proceedings, despite the plaintiff's ever-changing claims. The facts are clear, and it's time to conclude this matter. The judge looked between the two of them, his expression hardening as he turned to Lisa's lawyer. The DNA results do not meet your client's expectations, and that is no grounds for further delay. This hearing will proceed. Mr. Warren, he nodded to my lawyer, you may begin. My lawyer, prepared and ready, stepped forward, his tone calm yet resolute. Thank you, Your Honor. Now that we have conclusive proof that my client is not the father of these children, it's clear Mrs. Mitchell has been less than honest in her claims. In light of this new information, my client is no longer obligated to provide financial support for Mrs. Mitchell's alleged needs as an expectant mother. Additionally, we seek to limit Mrs. Mitchell's share of any marital assets, as she has repeatedly acted in bad faith throughout these proceedings, violating the trust inherent in a marital partnership. Lisa's face paled even further. I could see the mask she'd worn this whole time starting to slip, her composure cracking under the weight of the evidence stacking against her. She opened her mouth, seemingly desperate to say something, but no words came out. Her lawyer, trying to maintain control of the situation, leaned toward her, whispering urgently. But Lisa seemed beyond help. And then, just as my lawyer was about to continue, Lisa suddenly gasped, clutching at her chest. She doubled over, her face contorting with what looked like pain, her breaths coming out shallow and fast. Her lawyer jumped up, looking at the judge in alarm. Your Honor, my client appears to be unwell. I request an immediate recess. The judge watched, assessing the situation, and after a moment, he gave a reluctant nod. The court will grant a recess. If Mrs. Mitchell requires medical attention, she should seek it promptly. The bailiff helped Lisa to her feet as she clutched her stomach, breathing heavily, her face a mixture of pain and fear. I couldn't tell if it was real or an act, but at that moment, I honestly didn't care. Watching her leave the courtroom with the life she had spun completely shattered was satisfaction enough. She had delayed the inevitable once again, but her web of lies was already beginning to unravel. As Lisa was led out, I caught her eyes for a brief second. There was no longer any defiance, no arrogance, only fear and desperation. This trial might be postponed once again, but she knew, as well as I did, that she was running out of moves. The courtroom was left in stunned silence as Lisa was led out, clutching her abdomen, looking as if she were on the verge of collapse. Moments later, an ambulance arrived to take her to the hospital, leaving the rest of us in a swirl of confusion and speculation. The judge had no choice but to postpone the trial once again, though he made it clear that this matter would resume as soon as Lisa was stable. I left the courthouse that day with mixed emotions, a sense of grim satisfaction that the truth had finally come out, but also frustration at yet another delay. It was like Lisa had found a way to stall her reckoning yet again, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was somehow part of her plan. Even so, I couldn't deny that her reaction had seemed real. There was something raw and desperate in her expression as she clutched her abdomen and cried out in pain. Over the next few days, updates trickled in. I tried to focus on my life, the plans I was finally able to make now that I'd gained control over my future, but curiosity gnawed at me. Then, one afternoon, my lawyer called with an update. It appears that Lisa experienced a threatened miscarriage, he said, his tone carefully measured. According to her medical records, which we obtained with the court's permission, she was under a great deal of stress, likely because of the DNA results, and it led to complications with the pregnancy. I sat there, processing this information. So it was true, at least partly. She really was pregnant, but the twins weren't mine, and now it seemed that her web of lies had begun to take a toll on her, both physically and emotionally. There was a strange irony in the fact that her deception, which she'd spun so carefully, was now tearing her life apart from the inside. She's stable for now, my lawyer continued, but the court has advised that we postpone the next hearing until she's medically cleared. They want to ensure she's able to participate fully in the proceedings. I nodded, though a part of me felt an unexpected pang of empathy. Lisa had done this to herself, but I couldn't deny the gravity of what she was going through. She was losing everything, her marriage, her plans, and now potentially even the children she had used as pawns in this twisted game. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity, quickly followed by a resolve to see this through. The next court date was set, but I knew that no matter what happened now, her lies had already crumbled. The day of the trial finally resumed, and I could feel the tension thick in the courtroom. This was it, the moment when everything would come to light. Lisa sat across from me, visibly shaken but trying to maintain composure. She knew that whatever we were about to reveal would be damning, yet it was clear she still hoped there might be a way out. My lawyer stood and began his closing argument, his voice calm and resolute. Your Honor, given the overwhelming evidence of Mrs. Mitchell's repeated acts of deception, we respectfully request that all marital assets remain with my client. We believe there is sufficient reason to argue that Mrs. Mitchell's actions violated the trust fundamental to their marriage and that she is not entitled to a division of property. He paused, then continued. In support of this request, we present video evidence which fully reveals the extent of Mrs. Mitchell's betrayal. The courtroom was utterly silent as he approached the judge with a remote, pressing a button to start the video. The footage I had gathered, the moments I'd seen with my own eyes, now played on the large screen before us. It showed Lisa and Dylan, the massage therapist, in intimate, unmistakable moments in our own home, in what should have been the sanctuary of our marriage. Every eye in the room was fixed on the screen, and even the judge's usually impassive face betrayed a hint of shock. Lisa's lawyer looked frozen, staring at the video with an expression of disbelief. And Lisa, her face turned pale, and her hands trembled as she lifted them to cover her face, as though that simple gesture could shield her from the fallout of her actions. When the video ended, my lawyer calmly turned it off and addressed the room. Your Honor, this video leaves no room for doubt as to Mrs. Mitchell's intent and behavior throughout this marriage. It is clear that my client was not only deceived but misled by a carefully orchestrated betrayal. We formally request that the marital assets remain fully in his possession, without division. The judge listened, his face serious, as he jotted down a few notes. He looked up and asked, "Are there any further comments or statements from either side?" Lisa's lawyer was silent, his face drawn and tense. There was nothing more he could say in light of the evidence. Lisa sat beside him, still covering her face, her entire demeanor one of defeat. When no one spoke, the judge nodded. "Very well," he said, his voice steady. "In light of the evidence presented, I will retire to my chambers to deliberate and prepare a final verdict." With that, he stood and exited the courtroom, leaving us all in silence. This was it. The truth had been laid bare, and now we waited for the final word. The judge returned after what felt like an eternity, his expression one of firm resolve. He took his seat, glanced over his notes, and then looked up, his eyes passing over each of us before resting on Lisa. There was a brief silence as he gathered his words, and I could feel every heartbeat echoing in my chest. Finally, he shook his head, his voice somber. In all my years presiding over family law cases, I have rarely encountered evidence as clear and irrefutable as what has been presented here today. Mrs. Mitchell's actions constitute a fundamental breach of marital trust, and given the evidence of deceit and infidelity, I am left with no other option. He looked directly at Lisa, his gaze unwavering. I am forced to dissolve this marriage and rule in favor of Mr. Mitchell's request. Mrs. Mitchell will not be entitled to any share of the marital assets. All property, financial accounts, and possessions will remain solely with Mr. Mitchell. There will be no division of assets in this case. A collective silence settled over the courtroom, each word resonating like a final toll in the end of our marriage. Lisa sat there, her face frozen in disbelief, her hands resting on her stomach as though the gravity of her situation had finally, fully set in. She was left with nothing. No assets, no future with me, only the consequences of her own actions and the pregnancy she had tried to use as leverage. The judge looked at her one last time, his voice now softened but resolute. Mrs. Mitchell, I hope this ruling serves as a chance for reflection and change. This court is now adjourned. With a final strike of his gavel, it was over. My lawyer patted me on the back with a smile, and relief washed over me. After months of betrayal and deception, I had finally won, and Lisa's scheme had come crashing down. She left the courtroom defeated, clutching her stomach, realizing she'd gambled everything, and lost it all. With the court ruling behind me and my past firmly in the rearview mirror, I made the decision to start fresh. I packed up my things, left the memories of our home behind, and moved to a new state. I wanted a clean slate, a place where I could rebuild my life without the shadows of betrayal lurking around every corner. The transition wasn't easy. I'd left a lot behind, not just the house but years of memories and plans that now felt like a distant, fading dream. But the move itself became a kind of therapy. I found a new job in a field that offered stability and a chance to grow, something I hadn't thought about for a long time. The work felt refreshing, giving me a sense of purpose and progress, each day another step away from the chaos I'd endured. Slowly, I started to rebuild. I met new people, formed friendships that had no connection to the mess I'd left behind. I began to enjoy the simple things again, an early morning coffee, a quiet evening walk, the freedom of knowing my time and life were fully my own. With every new routine, I felt more at peace. I didn't dwell on Lisa or her lies, instead, I focused on the person I was becoming. My life now was mine alone, no longer overshadowed by deceit or manipulation. Starting over had been daunting, but in the end, it was exactly what I needed. Each day reminded me that, despite the betrayal, I'd emerged stronger and with a clear understanding of what truly mattered. This new chapter was one I could write on my own terms, and for the first time in a long time, the future felt bright and entirely within my control. Starting over in a new state, I felt lighter than I had in years. But every now and then, memories would sneak up on me, reminders of Lisa, her lies, and the elaborate betrayal she'd crafted around us. And then there was Dylan, the massage therapist who'd been in on the deception all along, thinking he could invade my life and walk away without consequences. Not long before I left town, I made sure to leave my own mark. Nothing reckless or dramatic, but enough to make him realize that his actions had consequences. I reported him to the local licensing board, providing enough evidence to ensure his certification would come under scrutiny. From what I heard later, he'd lost clients and had to rebuild his practice from scratch. It wasn't much, but it felt like justice, one final piece of closure, knowing he wouldn't be able to so easily take advantage of others in his line of work. In time, I learned something else, news that was as unsettling as it was final. Lisa, after losing the case, had made the choice to end the pregnancy. Maybe it was an act of desperation, a realization that her plan had failed completely, or perhaps she saw no future with the life she had created. Regardless, it was a choice that left me with mixed feelings. Part of me felt relief, a sense that it symbolized the end of everything she'd tried to use to manipulate me. But there was also a sadness, knowing she had become a victim of her own choices, losing even the last remnant of the life she thought she could control. I sometimes wonder what she and Dylan thought they'd gain from it all, how they'd imagined the outcome would play out in their favor. But in the end, they were left with nothing. It was a fitting conclusion to a story built on deceit, manipulation, and betrayal. As for me, I closed that chapter, carrying with me the lessons it had taught me. I had everything ahead of me, a clean slate, a future I could shape without looking over my shoulder. And for the first time in a long time, I felt that everything was going to be all right.